and welcome to Emotional Grit, the podcast where you can learn about the power of perspective and the science that fuels us. I'm your host, Jennifer Fernjack, and today's episode, along with the others of my podcast, can be found on my YouTube channel of the same name, Emotional Grit. So please feel free to like and subscribe. I'm happy to say that my guest today is author and keynote speaker Jean Abbott. Her story of emotional grit is nothing short of amazing. It literally has been shared on news outlets over in Europe, the Today Show here, magazines, websites, you name it, because literally for decades, she was treated for a disorder that she never had. So Jean, without further ado, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to see you and chat with you today.
This is great. So if you could please take the audience and I back to when you were about 12 months old, please share with everybody just kind of the things that the things your parents were seeing as far as making them think, you know what, I think something might be a little bit not quite as it should be.
Sure. So I guess it was mainly when I was starting to learn how to walk, and they were noticing my knees were kind of turning in more than my older siblings, and I was tripping and falling a lot more than a normal child should. And so they did bring me to, the regular family doctor, and he thought it was something that I would outgrow. Except when I was getting a little bit older, it started getting a little bit worse. So.
Okay, so as things then got worse and you began going to different doctors and getting different opinions, how were your parents given the opinion, if you will, that you had a certain condition that we later learned that you do not?
Well, I guess initially my parents had gotten a phone call from the doctor saying that they didn't know what was wrong with me and that to be prepared for the worst. And so that was an absolutely awful feeling, the feeling of not knowing what was wrong with their daughter. And it was probably about a year after that or so that the doctor finally said that they thought I had spastic diplegia, which now falls under the cerebral palsy umbrella. But they were relieved with that because they knew that it would not get worse. So, and that I would live. But that my daily functions would be more challenging than others. Having spasticity in both my arms and my legs would alter everyday living.
So when you talk about spasticity, would you mind defining that for the audience or just giving some examples of what that means?
Sure. It's the spasticity is really just having very tight muscles, which makes it more difficult to move your hands or hold like pencils or utensils. And I've often would kind of describe it as, you think about when you have a really hard workout and the next day you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really sore. I'm having a really hard time moving my leg or stretching. So it's like that, but significantly worse, of course, because it will alter how you walk. And for some, it even alters how they speak. But
Oh,
fortunately,
interesting.
I never had that issue.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Um, I know that when I wrote about you in my book, you had mentioned that at one point you had to have braces on your legs as you slept. How old were you and how long did that last? And what was kind of the thought behind the braces?
So I was in the first grade, and initially they wanted to have me wear the braces 24 hours. So they were like casts. You think about the cast that you get when you break your leg or your foot or whatever. So initially they had me in that, and the thought is to keep basically my heel cord stretched backwards. So like my feet were so it would be a constant stretch for my ankles because otherwise I was such a tiptoe walker. But when I had those the casts on at school, I literally couldn't walk at all in them. It was just so cumbersome. So they took those off and decided that I would just wear them at night. So
Okay.
my mom would, put these on me every single night, wrap my, ace bandages around them to keep them on. And I did that until, gosh, I think I was probably going off to college. And I was like, okay, I don't want to do this in college. So, but they were definitely helpful.
Excuse me. So when you mentioned whether it's having to wear the equivalent of braces at school or not having them, but possibly walking with more of a tiptoe or perhaps your knees knocking or different kinds of things, what was that like socially? I mean, kids can be mean. I mean, just what was your experience as far as the emotion and the psychology of all that?
Well, I mean, when I was in first grade, there weren't any issues at all with it. Actually, all
Okay.
through elementary school, it was fine because,
Okay.
I think it's when we go to middle school that that's when life gets tough. I mean, I joke about it, but I'm kind of like, if you can make it through middle school, you can make it through anything. So elementary school was super easy that way, but middle school was tough. Kids definitely made fun of me, called me names, imitated my walk. But I mean, I was always really fortunate that I also had a lot of really good friends that had my back and stuck up for me. So it was bearable. I mean, there were days I was sad. I go home crying, but for the most part, I was able to get through it on a positive note because of my friends.
Well, that's fantastic. I know one thing that you had also shared when I was writing my book was how, and I'm paraphrasing, so please feel free to correct me, but basically it was that your parents acknowledged the fact that it was assumed that you had cerebral palsy, but
Mhm.
it wasn't going to define you. It wasn't something that was going to hold you back from doing certain things. What will be examples of things that other people might think that, oh, they're having her do that? Whereas your parents were like, no, it might take you longer, but let's figure out the how. What were some of those items?
For sure. Like one of the things I remember vividly would be like going to football games in the evening when I was in junior high and high school. And I think it's important for your listeners to know that I did really well in the morning and I would get worse as the day would go on. So in the morning, I could walk fairly easily. But by evening, it was just a challenge, a struggle. So when we go to these football games, from the parking lot to the field where you up into the stands, it can be kind of a long walk. And yeah, I think these friends would say, "Gosh, why don't you just get a wheelchair? It'll be so much easier and she can get there faster." And it was, well, no, because she can do this. And they wanted to make sure that I kept strong and, like we do exercises at home to keep my muscles strengthened. So, which is probably why I had such a fairly quick recovery once I did get my correct diagnosis. But they always encouraged me to try new things. And yes, and just not babying me, not treating me super special because of this. I mean, of course, I'm their daughter, so I was special in that way. But, you know,
In
if
essence,
there
it
was
sounds like
something,
they didn't want to clip your wings because eventually you would leave the nest and have to know how to fly, so
yeah.
it was
Mhm.
having the confidence that comes from doing certain things on your own, or it might take longer but you figure out the how, or maybe there is some kind of a new normal to something, but you learn to adapt and move forward. And it doesn't mean that it's easy all the time. It just means that it's just possible. It just might be a little bit different than what you were used to.
Absolutely, because I mean, the fact is we all have challenges. We all have things that maybe we don't come easily to us. But if you work at it, you can usually find the tools to be able to do that. So it's just a matter of keeping that positive attitude and leaning on your support network to accomplish those different goals and tasks.
Definitely. So is it a fair assumption then that your parents still had you do chores and things like
Oh,
that?
yeah. Oh, yes, of course, of course. I mean, now granted, my brothers were a little jealous because I didn't have to mow the lawn or shovel the driveway because, of course, my parents were going to give me impossible things to do. But oh, yes,
Right.
uh, to this day, I still don't like unloading the dishwasher because that was my chore because I could do it. So yes.
Right. Right. So, I alluded to a couple of different types of surgeries earlier. One being that it involves something called a shot blocker. Would you mind describing for people, or a shot block, what that means and what that entails?
Sure. And so I had that done about every couple years, starting in my early elementary years. And it wasn't necessarily surgery per se, but I had to be put under anesthesia to have the procedure done. And so they would put these shots up into my groin area, into my groin, and it made it so my when that was done, that my knees would not touch one another.
Wow.
So, because I was a knee knocker, and that was the reason I would trip and fall so often, was being on my tiptoes and the knees knocking. So
Wow.
then as I got older, that procedure, I was just starting to kind of grow out of it and it wasn't working anymore.
So how long would the shot block work? Like on average, was it like a couple months or?
Well, the first time I did it, I think it lasted a couple years, and then the next time I did it, I think it lasted about, say, a year, and then it
Okay.
was just kinda getting shorter and shorter, and of course, the physicians are always concerned because it's not good to put someone under anesthesia, right? So there's always that risk, so that's why they decided that they needed to do something a little more permanent.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Speaking of things being a little bit more permanent, I also understand that there was another type of surgery. I'm not sure if it was more than once, but where muscles were detached from your hips and then reattached in a different way. Could you describe that to people and what it
Yes.
meant?
And yeah, and so I call that the muscle transfer, and that was the permanent fix to the shot blocks that were no longer working. And so, yeah, it was described that they would move basically my hip muscles around to make it so my knees permanently would no longer touch one another. And I can remember going in for that appointment where the doctor was explaining this surgery, and he was saying how it would be just as painful as open heart surgery, and then I would have to be in a body cast for a month. So, and I was 12, and I can remember leaving that appointment on the way home, and no one in the car was talking. My parents, they weren't talking, and I was just like, I can't take this silence anymore. And my mom I just kind of blurred out, can you believe this doctor thinks I'm going to have this surgery? Because I was not having it. I mean, I wanted nothing to do with it. And my mom just kind of turned and looked at my dad and then me, and she said, you're having this surgery. And it was then that I realized, like, okay, this was a consult. I really don't have much say in this. This is going to happen. And so just kind of went with it and tried to find the positive in it.
And that's half the battle. It's those mental gymnastics of getting your head around it. You having your mind be your friend, not your foe.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's like the what ifs could just, consume you, or different things as well, as far as the emotion of it too. And I think
Yep.
about seventh grade. I mean, I thought it was bad enough that I got braces. Okay, that's nothing. It's like, because I knew that there were other kids who were older than me that got braces first, and they would warn me that, oh, you're going to have wax put in your mouth, where the so the braces don't cut the inside of your mouth, and so I didn't quite know what to expect. But again, that's nothing in comparison to this. So I just commend you for your mindset and just your attitude, But when you talked about how after a good night's rest, how it was easier to do things in the morning, whether it was walk or it could be dexterity in your hands or different kinds of things, would you try to use that to your advantage as far as like maybe doing your homework in the morning instead of at night or different kinds of things like that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that was kind of when I would, in the morning is when I would go ride my bike or, kind of be outside chasing my brothers around or whatever. I did do homework quite often in the morning, like using scissors and writing, because that was always a challenge the later it got in the night. And then as I became a teenager, and of course, you want to go out with your friends in the evening. So I would get home from school and I would take a nap, because when I'd sleep, that's when we make our dopamine. And so if I took a nap, I'd be able to walk again.
But I would imagine back then you probably didn't know about dopamine. It was just a matter of, hey, if I take a nap and get some rest or get some sleep, I'll be able to, have better motor skills and get out and have more fun. And
You're
that's
exactly right.
fascinating.
You're exactly right,
That
and
is
this was
fascinating.
something that I expressed to the doctors often. I said, "It's so weird that I do better in the morning. It's so
Yeah,
odd that I can function again if I take a nap." And,
right.
it is what it is. I feel like, it was all for a reason, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
What date range would this be? Like, was it like in the 90s or the early 2000s, or what was kind of the date range?
of,
As
like,
far as you like knowing that if you took a nap, you would have a better experience at the football game or whatever.
oh, early on, elementary school I mean,
Okay.
it was pretty early on.
So the
And
the,
as
the
yeah.
reason the reason why I ask is because I was thinking, the World Wide Web might not have been popular yet. So it was like people didn't know what they didn't know, or wasn't that maybe it existed, but just wasn't that popular yet. I mean, I'm older than you are, and I think back to when I was in school, it was, like the kids who were spoiled had encyclopedias. Well, I wasn't one of those kids, you know what I mean? So it was like you just didn't know what you didn't know. And so people now might think, Well, could you just Google, why do I feel better after I sleep? Well, that may or may not have been either an option or a popular option back then.
It's so funny you say that because, side note, I was just showing my son the encyclopedias that my parents had at their house, and he's like, "What is that?" I go, "This, my son, was our internet." And he's like, "What?" But my mom,
That's
these doctor's appointments I would have waiting for the neurologist. I mean, we would be in the waiting room for hours waiting, like even if with an appointment. And so she would actually go on campus to the medical library and use that time to do as much research as she could about it. Uh,
wow.
because she just, my parents always wanted to make sure that they didn't miss something. She's like, I didn't want it to come back one day and have it be, well, gosh, we could have just had this easy fix. So,
Right.
I mean,
Good for her.
yeah.
That's
So, because you're right. I mean, the internet didn't exist until I was in my 20s, like early 20s, I guess. So,
it's like you didn't know what you didn't know.
no. And I mean,
Yeah.
and about
Mhm.
20 years ago, or no, wait, yeah, about 20, 25 years ago, there was a different story about the Beery twins who also had DRD, and they went 5 years misdiagnosed, and they were on Good Morning America. I actually have a link to that on my website.
Okay. Okay.
Great video, but it was twins that had the same thing as I do. And, so if a person happened to be watching TV at that moment, they would see it. But,
On that
like,
exact
unlike,
day, exact
yes,
time. Yep.
but unlike now, I mean, I think of all the people that saw my Today Show interview and have reached out to me saying that they've received a correct diagnosis, but they didn't have to watch it that moment it aired because it's still there. And
Exactly.
so the internet, is, some say it's a blessing and a curse, right?
Right,
And
right, right.
so, but
It,
they can just Google and
it,
it's amazing.
I mean, literally, somebody had asked me one time, well, Jen, if you didn't have access, to the internet a long time ago, how would you find things out? Since I didn't have encyclopedias. And I would just say, well, I would just ask my parents. I mean, I could have asked either of my parents, what's 2 plus 2? And they could have said 5. And I would have gone, okay, because it was like, there was nothing else to base it on. But it's just, so basically, for your mom to have that tenacious mindset of, I'm going to go to the medical library and check out some books and do some research and do what she could. That's amazing. And then she also fostered that mindset with you, as far as learning to try to think through things or do the best you can with what you have and concentrate on what you can do, not just what you can't do. That's
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
So what was it like going to these different doctor appointments? I mean, was it conflicting opinions here and there, or was it a consistent message of you have cerebral palsy?
It was a consistent message. And I mean, I was seen by one of the best neurologists in the country, if not the world. He wrote all the pediatric neurology books. And uh, when we went to another renowned hospital for a second opinion, I was there for about a week. They confirmed the diagnosis and said, actually, continue seeing the doctor you're seeing because he taught all of us here. And so we never really second guessed it after that. And I think that is one of the messages I like to be able to give physicians is because I saw a lot of different physicians after that, just, and everyone was so enamored by that was your doctor? Like, what was he like? And so I think nobody ever thought that he could have made a mistake. And the thing is doctors are human too, and they can make
Right,
mistakes, right? And
right.
so somehow this got missed, but so I try and like encourage doctors to really listen to the patients as though they've never been seen by a
Oh,
physician yet, and let them ask the questions, and which is not always easy because they are definitely on a time crunch when we get in their clinic. So
right. So, well, we'll fast forward a little bit. All of a sudden, it's time for you to go to college. And if I remember correctly, didn't you kind of initially not want a mobility scooter? Were you initially kind of like a little like I don't want that? So I'm just wondering how did you get your mind around that, and when did you realize that there's more of a benefit here than negativity associated with it?
no, you're right. And well, first, like the reason I didn't want it, it was kind of like I had worked so hard to stay out of a chair. So I didn't want to have that as a crutch there. But my parents encouraged me and said, let's just get it. if you need it, it's there, and if you don't have to use it. And I have an older brother who's about 3 years older than me, who is just like a goofball, always makes me laugh. And he was like, when the mobility scooter was delivered, and he gets on it and he's like, "Gee, this isn't too bad." And so he was showing me how to do wheelies, and I mean, so
That's
it was just
awesome.
like,
That's awesome.
okay, this is going to be cool. I can do this. And when I got to school, I mean, stress also always impacted my mobility. And it's so stressful, right? Moving to a new place and being around all new people. And that first couple weeks, I used that mobility scooter almost all day, every day, because I was so fatigued. And it really gave me an independence that I would not have had otherwise. And sometimes, I always say, like, don't give up hope, but there are times when we just have to accept what is.
Yes, I agree completely. So, and if I also remember correctly, I believe there was something about the stress associated with your dorm room. I believe, wasn't your window open or something, and there was like a train that would come by?
Yes,
And what was,
yes, every hour on the hour, a train would go by in the middle of the night and blow its whistle. So this was in Winona, Minnesota. Beautiful area, but man, I did not get much sleep. I mean, pretty soon, eventually you get used to it, right? And today I love the sound of a train. So, I mean, I'm glad I don't have one in my backyard, but
right, right.
but
Well,
it was so loud. It would
and
like shake the building.
well, and also, didn't your dorm room like not have air conditioning or something? So there was also like you'd want to open the window, but then it was so loud because of this train, and it just caused, not only did it disrupt your sleep, but it caused stress, which then can hamper your ability to have your I guess to walk around and again have the dexterity of different things and
Correct. It was so hot. I mean, because you think about it, you move in the last week of August, and if any of your listeners aren't from Minnesota, I know a lot of people think Minnesota looks exactly what your background is right now all
yeah,
the time, but it
yeah,
gets hot here in the
yeah.
summer. Oh, it was so hot and muggy. And yeah, with that train going in the background, and oh my gosh, it's like no wonder why I had to use my scooter for the first 2 weeks. I was exhausted.
Right. So
Oh,
how would that work then as far as being able to do your homework or take tests and be able to use a pen and things that before you would do in the morning, like at least in high school, you had the ability to feel better in the morning and feel refreshed. There was no train. You got a good night's rest and could do your homework at that point. But now you're in college, you live in the dorms, the noise is what it is. What would you do then for being able to hold a pen and doing other kinds of things, having had that lack of sleep?
yeah, well, I was one of the rare students that I always scheduled my classes. I always had the 8 a.m. class, 8 a.m., 10 a.m. I tried always to not have afternoon or evening classes. I mean, sometimes there was no other option, but that's what I would do. So I would pretty much have all of my necessities done by, say, noon. And I could go back, eat my lunch, take a nap, and then work on studying and homework. So, and you think about too in college, a lot of your homework is just reading and studying. So, and when I'd write papers, I just go to the computer lab and type. And for the most part, I was able to type pretty easily. It was a lot easier than writing with a pen or pencil.
I could see that.
Yeah.
So, as college is coming to an end and you're about to start this next phase of life, could you share with the listeners as far as just kind of what happened and whether it's like from a medications perspective or just where you were socially and how you took the next steps?
Sure. Well, out of college, I ended up getting a job as an employment counselor, which was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that. I married, I had my two daughters, and oh my gosh, I will say being a disabled mom was so hard. It was like the hardest job I've ever had. I think being a mom, a parent in general, is an incredibly hard job because it's stressful, it's exhausting. But it was harder because it took me longer to do simple tasks. So, but of course, a blessing because I never thought I would have children. I didn't see that in my future. And so, uh, again, surrounding myself around my support network and getting as much help as I could. But by that point, I was taking about 13 or 14 muscle relaxers a day, just to be able to somewhat feel comfortable. Uh, After I had my second daughter, my symptoms were getting a lot worse. And so I went to go see another neurologist, and had what they call an intrathecal baclofen pump implanted. So that way I wouldn't have to take as many medications and it would just come through like basically the bloodstream.
How big was the pump and where was it?
So it was about the size of a hockey puck and it was just under my skin on my right side. So, like where your appendix is, that's kind of about where it was. And then the tubing went like up my spine. And so it was a major surgery to have that. When I had it,
Wow.
I had to lay flat on my back for 3 days. So it was a kind of a big deal.
So
And yeah.
after you had this hockey puck size pump put under your skin, so it's in your body, and there's tubes going into your spine, how would you even do things like sit in a chair or lay down? Or I would think you'd be like laying on the puck or sitting against the puck.
Well, the puck was in like in the front, like my stomach. So it was always in front of me.
Okay.
I know, and I was a lot thinner then, so I didn't have like the flab, but giving the buffer. But for the most part, you like the tubing in the back and stuff. You don't feel it. I mean, it's there. It's just embedded in your body, and
Wow.
the puck was definitely noticeable, but you get used to it. I mean, like anything else, you get used to it, I guess.
Yeah,
So, but
that's true.
flying was another adventure because I'd have to make sure I brought my medical card because I couldn't go through the metal detector. So, yeah.
Right. So if I remember correctly, there was kind of this dichotomy of you feeling worse. So then your doctor giving you more medications, but then you would feel worse, not realizing that it's like a chicken and an egg kind of a thing where it's you were being overly medicated and obviously I shouldn't say obviously at that time, but now with the gift of hindsight, being treated for a disorder you didn't have. So, I mean, at one point, how did things get as far as I know you had talked before about even just sitting up in a chair, you had to be propped up with pillows. I
Mhm.
mean, the whole idea of needing help taking a shower or someone wasn't it one of your kids, I believe, who would like make sandwiches and bring you dinner in bed, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Uh-huh. It was awful. I mean, I had lost what little mobility I had because I was over medicated by all these muscle relaxers. And
Oh,
now to come find out, years later, I mean, I could have died. I was on so much, I could have died. Um, yeah, I mean, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't roll over in bed. I couldn't put covers over myself. And because I had lost all mobility. I mean, it was like I was a human noodle, like a wet noodle. And that's when I started dealing with some anxiety and depression. It's the first time in my life I'd ever dealt with that, and it's awful. I mean, it can be more debilitating than the physical stuff. So I knew I needed. I called my mom and I'm like, help me find a therapist. I need to talk about this because I just so my mom did that for me and she'd come pick me up and drive me there. And through therapy, I discovered that losing that mobility to that extent was like the loss of a parent or a spouse. So I was able to really kind of talk through all that. And then it was like, I need a new doctor. This doctor doesn't know what he's doing. And
well, well,
yeah.
and I bet your mom was happy to help, but at the same time too, I wonder what it was like for you as a mom. Normally in your home, you're going to be the caretaker. It's you have your household duties, your childcare duties, and I say duties with air quotes, you know what I mean? But it's you have things that you not only need to do, but things you want to do because it's part of being a parent or being a spouse or that kind of thing. And so, how did you kind of mentally and emotionally get around that, where instead of you being the caregiver, you're the caregivee?
I'll be honest, that was Oh, that was so hard. I mean, there were days that I thought that maybe my kids would have been better off with their mom in a nursing home. I mean, those thoughts actually went through my mind because my daughters were only like 6 and 4, and they were making me peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But they'd just come into my room and we put a towel on the floor and I would eat in bed, they'd eat on the floor, and we'd watch Curious George, and we'd read books together. And at the time I thought, gosh, oh, I'm just being such a horrible mom because I'm not like physically up doing things with them. And my mom would always say, no, because you're still giving them love. And you know it's so funny because years later now, they're 10 years older than their little brother, 10 and 8 years older than him. And when he was only about 4, they're like, Mom, we need to have a picnic in your bedroom with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and watch Curious George because that was so much fun and he needs to experience that.
Wow.
And so it kind of
Wow.
just made me realize, like, kids don't need these grandiose adventures, they just want to know that they're loved and
Mhm.
seen. And yeah, I mean, to them, this is just how mom was.
It's a power of perspective, that's
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
So when you talk about reaching out to your mom and how you were like, something's got to change here, I'm having these reactions. I'm on too many different muscle relaxers and different things. I can't even sit up in bed or roll over by myself. What happened next? Or how did you proceed?
So then we went and made an appointment at the Courage Center in Golden Valley. And
Oh,
that,
Jean,
oh,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. My cat just moved my computer. So my screen just
I saw that.
Tonka. I'm sorry. As we've been talking, I've been petting him under my table so he won't hop up and meow. But now he just moved the cord, which moved my computer. So continue, please. I
Sure.
apologize.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
So we decided to go to Courage Center, and they're, for your listeners who don't know, they are really all about movement disorders, and a lot of people who are become quadriplegics, paraplegics, they go to the doctor there. But they, at the Courage Center Golden Valley, had a baclofen pump clinic. And so, because I knew I needed someone who really understood how this baclofen pump worked. And
AKA the hockey puck, correct?
yes, the
Yeah,
hockey
yeah,
puck.
yeah.
And so we went to that appointment. My mom drove me there. Of course, she had to wheel me in there in a wheelchair. And we just, actually, I even told my mom, I'm like, I can't even tell this story. You're just gonna have to talk for me. I'm sure that the doctor thought I was also probably like semi special needs, like mentally challenged, because I literally sat there half slumped over in the wheelchair, not talking, not, I just let my mom do all the talking. Finally, she asked me a question and asked, can I ask you a question? And after her listening to everything, she goes, something just doesn't seem to be adding up with your diagnosis. Because she says people who have spastic diplegia, cerebral palsy, they don't get worse as they get older. And I'd really like you to go see a colleague of mine who specializes in movement disorders. But she goes, in the meantime, you're on way too much baclofen. And she started having me come in once a week to lower it, because you can't just shut it off. You can't just lower it super fast. And so she helped me immensely by lowering that dosage. And eventually I thought, well, I'll go see this colleague of hers, because I never guessed that the diagnosis could be wrong. I mean,
Right.
like, yeah. So then in time, I ended up going to see that her colleague, my brother brought me to that appointment.
So at this appointment that your brother brought you to, when did that light bulb moment kind of that epiphany happen, or what? As far as the doctor going, something might be a little off here, and deciding how to proceed.
Yeah, she said, everything you've told me, doing better in the morning, getting worse as the day goes on. She goes, I think you might have dopa responsive dystonia. So there's a medication I'd like you to take called carbidopa levodopa, same medication that Parkinson's patients take. And she goes, and if this works for you, you're going to be able to walk from A to B without thinking about it. And I'm telling you, I just thought, "This lady's crazy." Like, I wasn't gonna fill the prescription. I thought, "How could this be?" I mean, I've done all therapies and medications and surgeries, and she thinks I'm gonna take this pill and my life is going to change. And that was Good Friday 13 years ago.
Okay.
And I did fill the prescription and I took it. I had the best night of sleep that night, the best night of sleep. And 2 days later, it was Easter, and was waiting for the Easter egg hunt to start, and, my husband, Steve, was holding on to me because I always had to hold on to someone, and he lets go and says, "I'll be right back," because
Was he
he
testing
knew.
you?
He was testing me.
Mhm.
He knew. He knew. I mean, he knew my, my abilities probably almost as well as I knew my own, and he knew I could do it, and I think he knew I was scared. And of course, all these thoughts were going through my head as I'm standing there, not holding on to a person, a car. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fall. I can't do this. I'm gonna kill him because he left me standing here. And then this calmness just came over me, and I realized that this medication was working. And as someone with a very strong faith, I felt a closeness with God that I had not experienced to that extent before. And I knew in that moment that my life had changed. And it's funny because my mom, who happened to be there as well, came up from behind. I hadn't told her I started taking this medication. And she saw me standing there on my own, pretty straight, you know. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, Jean, is that you?" I mean, that is how much of a change it was in
Wow.
such a short amount of time. It was unbelievable. And so I just kind of at that moment made the decision that if I was given an opportunity to try something that I had never tried before, unless like skydiving, I was asked to skydive. No, thanks. No, I'm not a
Right.
thrill seeker to that extent. But I made that decision that I would give it my best and I would give it my all. And that's how really I fell into speaking, which I had a major fear of speaking. But, sometimes when we face our fears, we discover our passion.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you completely. And I'm saying that as someone with a titanium plate in her head because of my brain tumor surgery. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
So would you mind sharing with the listeners the story of you going out to, it was either to check the mail or take the garbage out, something where your daughter was watching through the window and you didn't know?
Yeah, I just got the chills. This is
Mm,
probably one of my favorite stories because
me
it
too.
is just the innocence. So I had received the correct diagnosis. It had been a couple weeks since I'd been taking the medication. I was doing really well, walking around really well in the house, but I went out to go get the mail, and I got on my mobility scooter in my garage, and I started to go towards the mailbox, and then I just kind of stopped. Like that line between the garage and the driveway. And I stopped there, and I was like, "You can do this. You can walk to the mailbox." Oh my gosh, I was so scared that I would fall, because I
Well,
didn't want the eyes on me of neighbors and
yeah, well, and I suppose in your home, you always had the contingency plan of falling on the couch or bracing yourself on a chair if you needed
Mhm.
to. But if
Yeah.
you're going to walk down your driveway, there's nothing, but the hard substance below your feet. So, and of course, the adjacent lawn is going to be kind of bumpy.
Mhm.
So I can see why you were kind of skeptical and not really sure if you should do this. But
It was scary. I mean, it was probably it sounds silly, but it was probably one of the scariest things I've ever had to do in my life, walk to the mailbox. But I thought, I just stood up next to my mobility scooter, was kind of holding on to the handles of it, and I thought, "You've been given a gift, and so you really need to get over this obstacle." And I just pushed myself. As scary as it was, I pushed myself, and I made it to the mailbox. And I started noticing that there was like a piece of paper in the grass. It was a really windy day, so I'm guessing something came out of the recycling. And I thought, okay, well, you can pick that up. And so then I walked from the mailbox to the grass and bent over, picked that up. And then I noticed another one on like another edge of like the side of my house. And the next thing I know, I'm walking around my house. It was the first time I had ever done that, walking around my house. And it took me a long time. I mean, I was going slow, of course. And my daughter, who was only 5 at the time, was in the house. And when I walked in there, she was crying. And I'm like, "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. Did you think mommy left?" I'm like, "I didn't mean to scare you by leaving you in here so long by yourself." She said, "No." She said, "I'm just so happy that you can walk."
Oh, wow. Yeah, I just got choked up.
I mean,
She was watching you through the window.
yeah. And she was just so happy that I could walk.
Wow. It goes to show you that just the best things in life are free. It's people assume that it's got to be expensive gifts or elaborate trips or whatever. But it could just be the memories your kids had of the picnics in your bedroom with the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Or it could be obviously this moment. I mean, for your daughter at the age of 5 to be crying because tears of joy and gratitude because her mom can walk, that's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to read an excerpt for the listeners from my book that I had written about your story, and it dovetails with what we're talking about right now.
Hmm.
But it reads, here we go. For years, she had believed that her condition could serve the greater good, and now she knew why. Oh, I'm gonna cry. Rather than feel bitter about the surgeries, leg braces, hurtful jabs of peers, and doses of medications that she never needed, she chose to view the decades of being misdiagnosed as a gift, not just for her, but for others, as positivity became her purpose. So that being said, I mean, your story is just, I keep saying amazing because it is amazing. And now, of course, you've gotten into sharing your story via the book that you wrote, and of course, with your public speaking. And I'm just wondering when you get feedback from people, whether it's in the moment after you're done with the speech, or perhaps maybe you get an email from someone, what kinds of responses are you getting from people?
Oh gosh. I've had people come up to me like 4 years later in a grocery store saying, "I still think about your talk almost every day when I get up because I stop and think about what's going right in my life and I think about the positives because it's so important that we acknowledge those every single day." People will say in messages or afterwards, "Thank you for being so real. Thank you for sharing the hard parts because I am one to focus on the positive. But there is a moment in my life where after the correct diagnosis, I felt like I hit rock bottom. And I share that because even Miss Positivity in that moment was feeling anything but positive. And I actually had to step back and say, whoa, Jean, you need to start using your own tools that you're teaching other people, right? Um, they'll say how relatable my story is. And they love the resiliency and they just feel so inspired, empowered, and motivated to really take charge of their life to make it a healthy and happy one.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything that I haven't touched on today that I should have, and any anecdotal examples or stories or things that you want to share with the audience?
Gosh, not that I can think of. I mean, I guess just a message to share with them is, if there's something you really want to do, try it. I mean, you might end up loving it, you might hate it, but that's okay. But what if you love it?
Yeah.
Face those fears. If there's a goal that you're really wanting to attain, um, bet on yourself and try it.
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
won't bet on yourself, who else is going to bet on you? You
Right.
know,
Right.
and just keep learning and growing because every day we're evolving into something more than the day before. So,
Definitely. Definitely.
yeah.
So if people want more information, how could they reach you? Like whether it's through a website, like what is your web address, or is there anything that they could do to get more information?
Sure. I mean, they can always go to my website, which is jeanabbott.com. I can be found on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube as well, with Jean Abbott, or I guess Jean Sharon Abbott. So my maiden name smacked in there. So yeah,
Or
that's
they could
probably the
even,
easiest ways.
or they could even on YouTube put in
Yeah.
Jean Abbott Today Show. That's
Yep.
just so cool
I
that you
know.
were that you were on the Today Show. That's amazing. But
Yeah, you have not cleaned your house until you've had national television come in there. I'm telling
oh,
you.
I
I
bet,
was
I
so
bet.
stressed out. I mean, like, yeah, I was so stressed out about it. I like literally secret, I washed the inside of my dishwasher.
That's awesome.
But the one place I did not clean was my junk drawer. And that's actually where I keep my medication when I need to take, during the day. And they're like, "Can we get a shot of you taking your medicine?" And so I opened the junk drawer, and the camera was like right there to my head. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, no."
so so at least that anybody who was watching knows that you're human and that most people have a junk drawer, you know. But
Yes, but isn't that funny?
yeah.
Sorry, my little
Well,
tangent.
thank you for being here. Thank you for just your mindset, your story, your ability to persevere, and just to show people that, hey, you know what? It's not always easy, but it is possible to move forward. So I appreciate you being here today.
Oh,
But
thanks so much.
so
And keep sharing other people's stories because they do help others to get through these trying times.
absolutely.
So thank
And to
you.
those of you who are listening today, thank you for being here as well. And as I mentioned earlier, this episode, along with other episodes of the podcast, are on YouTube at my channel called Emotional Grit. Thanks, everyone.